Welcome to our webinar on My Health, My Data. Today's webinar, we will touch upon the law, but we will focus more on how you can utilize Privado to actually comply with it. So it'll be more heavy on the product side. Perfect. Yeah. So again, welcome everyone. I know especially people on the West Coast is super early. So thanks for joining in to our webinar today. So on today's agenda, we'll briefly discuss the My Health, My Data Act, specifically what are the compliance requirements. And we'll go from a perspective of how can you comply, and then look at Privado's platform, code scanning platform, on how you can utilize us to get to compliance faster and remain compliant. We'll also have Q&A towards the end. In case you have questions as we go through this presentation, feel free to add them in the Q&A section below. There should be a button if you look at the bottom panel of Zoom, and you can just add it there, and me or someone from Privado will pick them up and answer your questions as we go along. Quick background about myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Vaibhav. I also go by V. I'm the founder and CEO of Privado.ai. And Privado essentially is a privacy code scanning platform. It enables privacy and engineering teams to collaborate better. We bring them all in the same platform and help technology companies or software-driven companies to innovate fast without breaking any privacy laws. So you can ship code fast with all privacy built into the new changes that your software teams are doing. Perfect. With that, a quick overview of the My Health, My Data Act itself. I mean, at least if you look at US over the last 12, 15 months, there has been a lot of regulatory action, fines, news, guidance from FTC, HHS. And also as a part of it, we've seen a new wave of health-specific privacy laws. And these privacy laws, at least what I've seen or as I interacted with the broader privacy community, are focused to close this gap between how health apps or companies who are not really regulated by health laws like HIPAA operate. So they are collecting consumer health data, but there's no real privacy law regulating that. So this law and the other laws which are being passed, I heard a couple of other ones as well, are trying to bridge this gap, and they're trying to address this specific practice. And I think one of the main differences or one of the main things I've seen in the My Health, My Data Act is they really go into detail and define what health data is. And once you define that really, and it's kind of broad in some sense. So once you do have a broad definition of data category, then you have the corresponding requirements as well, right? So you want to make sure at the point of collection, you're giving users a notice. You want to know all the uses of the consumer health data, especially if you are, let's say, an e-commerce company and you have purchase data, and on the back end, your data engineering team is doing something with that. So that becomes important. Sharing and selling specifically has a very, very hard requirements. So if you're selling data, it requires authorization, which is a really high bar. Sharing can happen if it's of your processors, but you do really need to know your data and where it is going for you to make that decision. And another unique aspect, there's no really caveats. It's basically even a single developer which has a health app, let's say a meditation app, comes under My Health, My Data. The main thing is it's focused around Washington residents. So, I mean, as long as you are either targeting them or, I mean, if they are in your database, or second, I think the another thing is if your collection, processing, sharing happens in Washington, right? Which means if you have a data center there, right? So that could be another reason why My Health, My Data could apply to you. Moving on, I think the first kind of step towards looking at compliance for this is the definition of consumer health data itself. And broadly, I think there are two key concepts. One is these identifiers as defined by the law. So things that can point to an individual user. That's not new. I mean, since most of us are in the privacy domain, you must have seen things like, cookies being identifiers or IP address or pixels, email, phone, the usual suspects, right? But the main thing is if they are linked to anything which can kind of use to determine any physical or mental health status becomes a consumer health data broadly. So these two things together. And once you kind of look at the definition like this, some things on their own can also become consumer health data. So for example, if there is a telehealth app and the cookie of the telehealth app, if you can use that cookie to determine someone is using that app, that cookie itself becomes consumer health data, right? Because remember, you have both the things. You can determine the physical or mental health status, and then you have the identifier, which is the cookie, right? So it's kind of, that's how kind of it is defined. On the physical or mental health status side, it's not only direct data, it's also inferred data. And that is where, especially on the back end or on the data analytics, data engineering side, is where you have to kind of think a lot. So imagine again, if you have a lot of purchase data, if you are a grocery company, if you're delivering grocery, then if that purchase data is used by your data engineering team to tag or create profiles on allergens, right? Like this is a list of all people who have, I don't know, lactose intolerant, and this is the list. If you maintain a list like that, then that definitely becomes an inferred consumer health data, right? So yeah, especially like companies which already have a health app, for them, definitely they have to look at all the data elements they're collecting. If you have a lot of purchase data and then your data engineering team are inferring health status from there, that definitely is health data as well. And here are some categories of data as defined by My Health, My Data. So there's the general health data, which could be things like health conditions, diagnostic, surgeries, procedures, gender affirming care information services. This is a big part of the law, both that and reproductive or sexual health information. A lot of this law also comes from the environment we are in, and basically the law derives, or one of the main goals of the law is to protect um, these two specific data types. So this is specifically defined, and inference or any of those things that you might be doing to get to these data elements are covered as well. So biometric data, genetic data are covered. Precise location, I think that's special because a lot of technology companies do collect precise location for multiple reasons. If you are a delivery app, then you might be taking the home address. If you are, let's say, a ride hailing app, then definitely if you're a map company, you definitely need precise location. So then the main thing is, if you can use precise location to indicate consumers either attempt to acquire or receive health service, then that becomes health data, which means, let's say, if you know I visited a health clinic and you have that tagged as a health clinic in your database, then definitely that becomes part of My Health, My Data Act as well. So if you are collecting precise location, it'll be good to look at that and see to what granularity are you saving the information. Also, are you collecting secondary metadata, which could be things like, visiting a health clinic, etc. Another thing which is quite unique to My Health, My Data, which I did not mention here, is geofencing, which means if you're specifically targeting users in a let's say retail environment and saying show people who visit this specific area and advertisement, that is kind of banned, specifically if it's around health clinics or health centers. So that's another thing to look for. And which brings me to kind of the final point on how do you comply with My Health, My Data, right? So it's kind of, I mean, if you have complied with any of the existing privacy laws like CCPA, which CPRA or GDPR, it's kind of like the first basic part of it starts with discovery, which means you need to first start with building a data map or doing that data discovery. You already might have done that. One thing to do for sure is to relook it from a lens of My Health, My Data and say, what are the new tags you want to associate? Or do you want to reclassify some of the existing data elements into consumer health data? Because again, as we look back, the definition is pretty broad. Especially if you are a company which has an health app, you need to look at your identifiers, PII, as health data. The second thing is, once you have that map, My Health, My Data specifically focuses a lot about collection points to give the notice, sources of data. Is it first party? Are you acquiring it from someone else? So identifying that becomes critical. Discovering any third party integration. Again, if you have an health app, discovering what are the third parties that are integrated. If you have a website with forms which are collecting health data, you might have pixels. So identifying all the JavaScript, pixel tags, any third party API or SDK integrations on your mobile app and website becomes crucial. And once you have kind of the base, right, you know the data, you know the user collection points, you know the third party integrations, building a nice data flow of how is this consumer health data coming into our system. So from your mobile app, that's your collection point, and where all it is going, which third party, which APIs, which SDKs, which advertising third party. Building that data flow diagram builds kind of the discovery phase, which is you know what you have. And with that, you can actually write a pretty consistent consumer health privacy notice, which is going to be accurate, which is going to be correct as well. And then the second kind of thing is remediation. So once you have the base layer of discovery done, once you have the data map, the second thing you do want to do is kind of fix things, right? So one is generating these documentation. So you would have to generate a consumer health privacy policy. But the next two things you do want to do is figure out your privacy issues. So anything which is related to health data flows. So you might be sharing health data with an advertisement, like advertising third party, or to your analytics system, which should not happen. So figuring that out and making sure if there is excessive data sharing, you fix that, you remove it from the code. Or if it's a genuine use case, then signing agreements, right? Signing agreements which have caveats for my health, my data. Another good practice would be to making sure you are integrated into dev workflows, because they'll be the ones who are building these products. So sending those tickets into Jira, Slack, GitHub would be another good practice. So that will take you to a place where you have the data maps, you build your documentation, you update your contracts, to finally prevention, which is looking at, because my health, my data is not static. Your applications will change. You will create more use cases. You will collect more data. Your engineers will integrate more third party, which means there will be more data collection, more data sharing, more third parties. So once you understand that, the main thing you want to do that is, because especially in my health, my data, there is a class action lawsuit, which means if at any point you stop to compliance, someone notices and they file, there is this whole Pandora's box that can be opened. So ideally, what you want to do is, once you have done the basic work of discovery and remediation, you want to move to a prevention phase where you have this consumer health privacy policy. And what you're trying to do is you're looking at software changes. You can do it at a design stage, which is you have a new feature coming up, you review it and see what's the impact. So add my health, my data there and try to remediate it. And that will reduce some of the risk. The second thing you should definitely do is put it part of your CI/CD. Look at if you are adding new third parties, if you are increasing data flows. And as that is happening, you are fixing things right there, right? And that also allows you to do just-in-time training for my health, my data. Let's say imagine an engineer introduces a new advertising pixel. Ideally, you either pick it up in the design stage, but most probably that won't come in a design review. So you find it in the SDLC. So whenever someone pushes a new code, you discover that, and then you create an issue, give the developer feedback on that as well. Perfect. So we're going to move to the next section, which is going to focus on how Privado can actually help you do that. But I'm going to take a pause and look at the questions and try to answer them as well. So the first question is on the broad definition on what constitutes a healthcare facility. It is quite broad, but since I'm not a expert on the law itself, but more on the operational part, I can't comment on that too much. But as far as I've interacted with most privacy professional, we did like a panel in IIPP as well, where both the attendees and the panelists had the same opinion that it is pretty broad. So you need to look at it, and the maximum we can do is wait for more clarifications. And then the second one was, if a company collects precise location of its consumer but does not use health data, yeah, so Diana, to your question, no, it will not. So if you remember, precise location is in the context of if you can use the precise location to identify if someone has an intent to acquire or has already acquired any health service, right? So which means precise location on its own is not health data. But if you're going to use it, or if you have used it, where there is some data which can link any health service, then it becomes consumer health data under my health, my data. I would just point one more thing to you is precise location in CPRA is also tagged as sensitive. So yeah, if you are collecting precise location, be a little more careful and just relook at my health, my data. If there is any secondary metadata that your engineers might be collecting or your product teams might be using, and that could reveal. Generally, you can ping third parties to get metadata of a building location, and that could have, hey, this is a hospital, right? So some of those edge cases could happen, but on its own, the answer to your question should be no. And thanks for all the questions so far. Moving on. So yeah, a quick glimpse of how Privado can actually help you. So Privado essentially is a privacy code scanner. So think of it as something which is going to go into look at the code which your engineers have built. And this could be of your mobile app or your website, or all the systems that your data engineers or data analytics team are building, or your backend teams are building. Essentially anything your engineering team is building from which your consumer health data is going to be collected or processed, we will scan that and build this data flow graph of those code and those applications. And what we are going to present as discover data elements, so discover and tag. So here are a list of data elements that you've processed. here are the consumer health data. Give you a global view of data flow. So where your data is coming in and where all it is flowing, including storage, sharing, leakages, and processing. Help you govern third-party sharing. So make sure if you are in your privacy policy, if you're making certain promises around my health, my data, or overall, you can actually adhere that and help you do automated data mapping. The entire process essentially super fast. Since we have only one place where generally companies maintain code, the entire process could take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes and you start to see the results as well. So it's pretty fast and you get a lot of information out of the box from Privado. And here are a couple of the use cases linked back to my health, my data, and how we can help you comply. So the first step, as you remember, was discovery, where you want to build this initial data map on what's happening with data. So what Privado does, it essentially will automatically create this data flow map for you. So it'll integrate and build this complete data life cycle of health data from collection to sharing to use and storage. And generally, if you have done any type of data discovery, you might know what data is sitting in which database. But then all these privacy laws and privacy in general is also about use of data. So you do want to map purposes to it, which is generally tied to an application, right? So it's tied to a mobile app or a backend system or a data engineering system, anywhere else, which is actually where the data gets used. And that is where Privado comes in. So it gives you the picture of use of data from where does it get collected, which all third parties does it get shared to, where does it get stored, and how does it get used as well. So that's kind of the first use case. So once we do the initial scan, we build this data map for you. Once that's done, the second use case is to figure out places of privacy issues. So then we have out of the box my health, my data policies, which helps you detect privacy issues. Essentially, it will go in and en masse look at all the data flows and say, hey, here are the data flows which violate my health, my data, or any other policies that you might have. And then based on that, create issues. Once we create these issues, you can from Privado send them to Jira directly and assign them to an engineer and they will fix that. So essentially you go from a place where you have the discovery done, you identify privacy issues and you can fix them. And finally, once you have these two, you want to move to governance or prevention, wherein if in the future someone introduces a new third party or adds a new data flow which violates your my health, my data policy, Privado will open up an issue right there in the source code management tool, which means whenever an engineer is writing a code, they go to their tool, which is GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. Whenever they make this change, Privado will right there give the engineer the guidance that, hey, this is not allowed. Can you fix this before you make this live? So essentially, think of this as your automated privacy check as part of software development lifecycle. You might be already doing this as part of the design stage, which is you will be interfacing on a ticketing system and say, hey, here is a new feature, I'm going to review it. But think of this as completely automated. So it's going to look at your policies and say, health data should never be shared with advertising third parties or policy. And whenever that policy gets violated due to a code change, it will break that. It will not allow that and give engineers a feedback as well. So that's kind of how Privado works. Gives you the initial discovery, helps you remediate production issues, and then gives you a lightweight, consistent governance, which allows you to make sure no future code changes or software features violate your existing policies as well. And kind of like beyond even my health, my data, if you're here and if you have broader use cases on around privacy, essentially, this is kind of what the Privado platform in general enables you to do. So first, it gives you a complete data lifecycle visibility. So again, right from collection, sharing, storage, processing of data, building a data flow map, helping you build data maps, which are dynamic. One of the core complaints we hear from customers are, we build our data map or we try to build it, but it gets outdated before we even started because there is a new software release. So help you build something which is dynamic, which gets updated on its own. And then third-party data sharing. Currently with any automated tools like data discovery tools, it's really hard to figure out third-party sharing. They miss that piece, and Privado actually helps to discover that automatically. So that's kind of the data lifecycle visibility portion. The second part is programmatic privacy governance. So you might already have privacy by design process or a technical privacy review or a PIA process, and that's generally done by companies at the design stage. What Privado enables you to do is take all of that, any PIA that you have done, any ROPA reports you have created, any policies you have committed to, and convert them into privacy checks as part of CI/CD or SDLC. So whenever an engineer makes a change, we will look back to your PI and say, hey, was that allowed? based on the PIA. If not, then stop it. So privacy checks or privacy by design becomes programmatic, where a human is not checking for things, a bot is checking for you. So it's kind of lightweight and it's consistent. So it checks all the time and it doesn't add a lot of load on your engineers. It doesn't reduce speed of shipping. It actually increases it because you are more confident. And finally, the last piece of Privado platform is developer collaboration. So we have deeply integrated into all development tools, Jira, GitHub, Slack, and we have privacy playbooks for each of these policies, which ensures whenever engineers are making any changes, you can just in time give them a privacy guidance. And both privacy and engineering teams can come on the same platform to do privacy training and also give them guidance on the things that they're doing wrong in the new software change. So kind of helping you bridge that privacy and engineering gap is what we also enable you to do. Perfect. With that, I am going to move to the demo and then we will go for Q&A as well. Perfect. So what you can see on the screen is kind of how the Privado dashboard looks. And I've picked some of the health repositories that I could find on GitHub to run the scan and show you what the typical Privado output looks like. So first of all, what you're seeing on the screen is not powered by any questionnaires. It's not powered by any data scanning. It's all done by code scanning. So we probably spent like about 5 minutes integrating and another 5 to 10 minutes in scanning. And you have reached from a place where you might not have the visibility to where you know all the data elements you have, including sensitive data and all the third parties. So first view is you go from a place where you go and say, okay, tell us all my data inventory, and it builds that up for you. It says, hey, I have 40 data elements, 81 third parties, 38 databases, 12 APIs, and here are my top data categories. Here are where my vendors are. Here are my recently added third parties. So it gives you like a broad picture view. And then you can kind of dig deep and say, show me all my health data or show me all my data elements. And then you can obviously go into a specific one and say, okay, for me, for example, let's say for you, again, health data is super important because my data is coming up and you want to figure out what's happening with illness or medical condition. It gives you a quick view of illness or medical condition is health data. It's being shared with Facebook, Google AdMob, Firebase, and OpenAI. And it builds that nice data flow diagram across the product. So across all the products that we have, this is what's happening with this specific data element. And if you dig deep, it will also tell you the specific product which is sharing this health data or storing this health data, right? And this is true across. So this is not specific to my health, my data, but like if you go in and say address, right? So for example, this is the journey of address. It is stored in a lot of databases. It is shared to a lot of third parties. There are some logs where this is being written as well, where it could be leaked in the future. So the first thing is in Privado, you get this global data flow view across all data elements out of the box by running a scan on your code. The same view you get for your third party. So for example, let's say you have a big use case of Gen AI and you have started to integrate OpenAI and you want to know what data is eventually going to flow to OpenAI. First of all, there's no data scanning possible on OpenAI. They don't allow you that. But since OpenAI will be integrated in your code, what you can do is utilize Privado to look at the same and say, okay, these are all the data elements which are going to go in OpenAI. And you can dig deep and say, okay, which repository, which product is sharing email address, which is sharing account ID, who's sharing medical condition. And these are like some different products, right? So you get that visibility from Privado in one click. The same could be true for, let's say, advertising vendor. You have a CPRA use case and you're worried about Google AdMob. Again, you can look at it and say, okay, this is my data flow map for Google AdMob, right? So once you have this global view of what all is happening with data, what are your consumer health data elements, again, when we go back and just simply apply the sensitivity, you can kind of look at it and say, okay, these are our health data elements. We have medical certificate, illness or medical condition, disability or specific condition. These are our health data element, and that's what we are processing. This is in our scope of my health, my data, and then the corresponding flows as well. So once you have this information, the initial, again, remember the data map, the first thing you want to do is probably build your consumer health data policy. You can do that. So again, Privado by default allows you to create that report. So here is a my health, my data report. It will put in all the kind of health data elements which are there. So all the PII, any contact data and health data are part of this report. So here is, for example, phone number. here's the sensitivity, here's where it is being shared, where is it being stored. So it helps you build that full report across the company of what's happening with health data, what are happening with our PIIs, online identifier, and contact data, which is kind of the scope for My Health, My Data anyways. So that's kind of the first part, which is discovery, going into a company and say, help me figure out what happens with that. Now, what you would want to do is once you've done that is pick a specific product. So I'm going to take this specific application called Leaky Health app and go into it and say, show me what's happening. And first of all, it tells you like, okay, this specific application is processing 8 data elements and there are some data inventory. You can see a nice data flow diagram saying this has connection to Facebook, Google AdMob, Mixpanel, Google Firebase, and Amplitude. It connects to a bunch of third parties and has some data elements, including account ID, device identifier as well. So you can kind of go in and look at that first. So here is the data discovery part of Privado, where it is saying this specific product, think of it as a mobile app or a website, has these many data elements. So device ID, advertising ID, illness or medical condition. As you can see, there are tags attached to it. So for example, GDPR is sensitive, CPR is sensitive, My Health, My Data once it goes live, and has a category, health data, personal identification, online identifier, has a sensitivity, and then also has a nice data flow view as well. So for example, we know for our illness or medical condition, this app is sharing data with 3 third parties. And this is something which would be considered selling under CPR, under My Health, My Data. That's something that you might want to fix as well. So that's kind of how you can look at a specific product of your entire organization and look at that. You can also do the same thing for inventory and say, I want to know what all is going to Facebook because that's a advertising third party and we're concerned of that. And it will do the same and say, okay, across this product, this specific product, all these data elements are being shared. Or it could be Amplitude, which is an analytics platform where you are only sharing ad IDs, email address, and device ID, but no health data. So that kind of starts to build the initial data discovery for you, where you have a global view, which is for your organization. But then also you can go to a specific product. You can go to a specific application and say, point me to this and tell me what's happening here. So you know company-wide what you're doing with health data, and then you know for a specific product, for a specific application, what's happening as well. Now, once you do the first part, you get to know the data map, you have a report for My Health, My Data. The next thing you definitely want to configure is policies. And we have some policies by default. So for example, a policy could be around health data should never be shared with third party, right? So it's like, as per My Health, My Data, we do not allow this. That's kind of one policy. Another policy could be you don't want any personal data sharing with advertising third parties. These are super configurable. The main insight here is what you want to definitely do is whatever promises you're making to your end consumer, they will be converted into policies in Privado, right? It could be automatically by scanning your DPAs, like we have here for Slack, wherein we have scanned the DP and built this policy, or it could be because you have a privacy policy, which is My Health, My Data, or My Health, My Data related policy, or general as well. Like, for example, the broadest policy here, as you can see, is sensitive data sharing to third parties. So you have a general policy where you do not want any sensitive data being shared with third parties. That could be another policy as well. Another cool thing that we have is this policy, which is new inventory. So think of this as anything related to data processing. So if you add a new data element, if you add a new third party, if you add a new database, whenever anything changes from a data processing perspective, anything new gets added to a specific product, we automatically create an issue for that. So this kinds of helps you in your privacy by design initiative. In case if you missed things in the design stage, we find that in as developers make those changes as well. So that's kind of the second phase of remediation, where we have some out of the box policies to help you configure those. And once you do that, then we create issues. And this is where what it allows you to do is figure out where there is, for example, this is a violation of My Health, My Data, wherein you have illness or medical condition being shared with Facebook. And this is something you do not want it to happen. We saw the same thing from a repository view, but this is a much more trackable way for you to figure out your privacy issues. Once you have this, you can send it to Jira. It's a one-click integration, and automatically we are pre-filled, we have generated a link so engineers can look at this as well. So again, we will take all the data flow and the data maps we created in step one, use our policy engine to create actionable items. These issues are all actionable, which can then be forwarded to your engineers into Jira tickets automatically. So that becomes kind of the second big use case of Privado, is not only doing the initial discovery, but also finding these issues across your products. The third use case, which I talked about, was governance, which was you definitely want to make sure if your engineers will be making any changes in the future, you want to make sure those changes are compliant, right? And that's kind of a big use case. How do you prevent things from happening? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take two specific products. I'm going to take first Leaky Health app. And in this case, what I'm going to do is this illness or medical condition right now, as you can see, is not shared with, I think, Mixpanel. And I'm going to add that. So if I do that, then it should create a issue for the engineer. And then a second thing I'll do is I will take this specific repository and add another third party, which is TikTok. And right now there's no TikTok here, so that should also create an issue. I'm going to attempt that live and hope everything works as is. So here's the first one, which is what I'm going to do is add a piece of code which starts sharing health data with Mixpanel. So I'm going to do that, act like an engineer who knows stuff. And I just did that. And what it does, it triggers a scan by Privado. So it's going to rerun the scan and figure out if there are any privacy issues on your behalf. While that's happening, I'm going to do the same for the next one. And let me quickly do that. So yeah, while that's happening, okay, I don't have, oh yeah. So this also initiated a scan. So this should also come back. So while this is happening, let me look at the other scan. So yeah, so the first scan is complete. So as you can see, what it is saying is that in the new change I propose as an engineer, there is one privacy issue discovered. And that is, it violates this policy, my health, my data, personal data sharing with advertising third party. And that is why this issue got created, right? So this issue is created because I added a code to send this to Mixpanel. Now, if I make it live, basically this will also come on our dashboard, right? So this is one example where the engineer got alerted. We can actually block this as well. So this is your guardrail in your SDLC. This ensures that you never go out of compliance with any of the existing laws, including my health, my data. So let me push this so that we can see this in Privado as well. And while this is happening, I think the other check is running. Maybe we can do a quick refresh, and it might be a bigger repository as well. So yeah, while that's happening, I think this one we should be able to see on the Privado dashboard as well. Let's do a quick refresh and see if the scan results are done. Or is it still scanning? I'll wait for a minute for the scanning to finish. And we should be good. Great. So while kind of you're finishing up with the scans, another interesting functionality that you can utilize in Privado is contact scanning. Essentially what it does, it scans your DPAs like Slack, and essentially will build out the allowed data categories there. And once we get this list, we automatically create a policy saying, hey, here is the allowed list of data categories that you can, as per the DPA, you can share with Slack. Once this policy is created, automatically you have an issue for that as well, where you can go in and look at if there are any issues related to that. Let me actually filter it and say Slack, Stripe. These are more programmatic policies that got created because in this specific case, there is some data element token which is going to Stripe, which is outside the DPA. So it's not allowed as per the data protection agreements as well. So that's another specific use case where you can utilize Privado to write policies automatically. And I think by now we should have it. And yeah, so you can see this I912. This is an issue that we created right now. I showed you that on the developer console as well. But this is basically the issue wherein, as you can see, in this case, there is data coming in, which is email, and it's going to here, and that created an issue as well. So yeah, that's kind of how Privado works. It basically builds the initial data map, helps you find issues, and then gives you this governance layer where not only you can figure out, you can give engineers guidance on their console on when they increase a data flow to an existing third party, Or in this case, for example, they added a new third party called TikTok.com. Again, this was also picked by Privado and created as a privacy issue for the engineer. And you can add detailed guidance here and all of that good stuff that you're already doing. So help you discover, remediate, and govern at scale across all your products. So I'm going to take a pause and then open it up for questions. So feel free to add if you have any questions, if you want to see anything else, happy to take everyone through that as well. Okay, that's a great question. So yeah, so we have default policies in Privado for my health, my data, which are pre-configured that you can just enable and you're good to go. The second question is actually pretty interesting, which is how about combination of data elements and potential inferences? So Privado actually, when it does the discovery, it looks at combination of data elements to apply tags, which means if we find, and we have actually found it on the back end, we have actually found profile tags in data engineering system and applied the my health, my data tag as well there. So it is 100% possible to do that. So typically the way we will write this policy is anywhere there is a health data tag becomes your source. So then you can start to write policies on sharing, storage, use, collection, all of that. And for applying this tag, we do look at direct data elements. So it could be part of a form, or indirect, where we have seen a bunch of data elements combining together. So that could be another reason as well. I'm going to say that is answered as well. And yeah, again, to your point, you can also write policies around user forms, which is another place where you see a lot of violations, right? So for example, in this specific repository, social security number is being collected, and there are these three user form, checkout page, session form, index form, where you're collecting social security number. So you can write whenever someone adds a form with consumer health data, that's something which requires a privacy review. So you can write these kind of policies as well. Again, because we look at the code where the source of truth of product is, we can look at the full life cycle of data collection, data sharing, data storage, data use as well. So I'll hang around a couple more minutes and answer if there are any more questions of the audience. Happy to take those up as well. So feel free to drop that. But yeah, that's what we had today for the webinar. A quick overview of the law and then demo of the Privado platform. And all right, then thanks everyone for joining, and hope everyone has a great rest of the day and great rest of the week as well. Thanks.